Imagine this, Port Royal, a place where fog clings to the streets like something alive, and even the bravest sailors lower their voices after dark. Behind a broken-down tavern, a coffin waits, resting on two cracked barrels. They say it holds the body of Captain Silas Drake, one of Blackbeard's most feared and loyal men. The crew stands motionless, their eyes shifting, their breaths shallow. Lanterns flicker, shadows dance on wet stone, and just as silence thickens, a single parrot, with dark, ragged feathers, starts to scream from somewhere in the mist. Lies, lies. No one knows where the bird came from. No one dares open the coffin. And deep inside, every man here wonders the same thing. What exactly is inside that box? This is not just another pirate story. It's a memory that sailors feared to speak aloud. A page torn straight from the pirate's diary, where guilt, betrayal, and fear of the unknown poison every word. Legends aren't just told, they're passed from sailor to sailor. If you crave the untold tales of the sea, loyalty, loss, and vengeance, subscribe to the channel and claim your place in our crew. Some called it superstition, others a warning best left unheard. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It slid down the ropes and soaked the wood until everything smelled of salt, rot, and something else, something heavier. The crew lingered near the coffin, shifting their weight, glancing at one another, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to speak. First, but no one did. It wasn't just the coffin that unsettled them. It was the sound coming from the iron cage hanging by the mast. A lone parrot, feathers dark and wet like oil slick on water, pressed against the bars. It hadn't stopped screeching since dawn. Lies, lies, over and over, as if the bird knew something none of them dared say aloud. Hawkins, the boatswain, a man who had stared down storms and cannon fire without flinching, climbed up the deck with a stained cloth in hand. His face was pale, his hands shaking more than he cared to admit. With trembling fingers he tried covering the cage, but the bird fought back, pushing at the cloth with its battered beak, refusing silence. The crew watched, each man sinking deeper into his own thoughts, memories they'd buried, mistakes they never spoke of. And then, from the far end of the deck, near the shattered lanterns where the light barely reached, Blackbeard appeared, soaked to the bone, his thick braids dripping with rainwater, his face carved with the kind of suspicion that only years of betrayal and salt air could leave behind. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, watching the coffin, and then the cage, as if weighing both like anchors from different storms. Finally, with a voice low, nearly a growl, words broke from his throat. Beasts of the sea, they don't lie. His gaze never shifted from the wooden box, not even for a second. And in that moment, under the grey sky and the endless curtain of rain, every man aboard felt it. That sick, slow pull in their gut, the kind of fear that doesn't shout but waits, patient, just beneath the surface, like something watching, something that had never truly left the coffin at all. The rain had slowed, but the air stayed thick, heavy like the breath before a storm. The sea creaked beneath the hull, restless, as if it too waited for something to break. No one spoke. No one moved. They stood in a crooked half-circle around the coffin, staring, listening to the drops falling from the rigging, mixing with the cold sweat on their skin, and then the parrot. From inside its rusted iron cage, it let out another shriek that cut through the air like a blade. "Open the coffin! Betrayal! Betrayal!" The words rang out, twisting in the minds of the crew like a bad memory you can't shake off. Some men crossed themselves, their fingers moving fast and desperate, like they hoped a quick prayer would undo the curse they felt tightening around the ship. Others just stepped back, their boots scraping against the wet deck, eyes wide with the kind of fear that turns even the bravest into cowards. Hawkins, still gripping the edge of the coffin, froze mid-motion. His hand hovered above the lid, trembling, as if something beneath the wood could feel him, waiting for the slightest touch to react. "Bloody birds, just repeating nonsense," he muttered under his breath. But the words fell flat, unconvincing even to himself. And then it happened. A soft, almost lazy drip began sliding between the cracks of the wooden planks. At first, most thought it was just rainwater. After all, the storm had left everything soaked, but this was thicker, darker, and it moved like something alive, tracing slow red lines down the side of the coffin, pooling near Hawkins' boots. Blood. The word passed like a whisper between the men, no one daring to say it aloud, but everyone knowing exactly what it meant. Hawkins stumbled back, nearly slipping, his face drained of every color but fear. All eyes turned, every breath caught, waiting for someone, anyone, to take control. And from the far shadows of the quarterdeck, Blackbeard stepped forward. His coat hung heavy from the rain. His boots hit the wood with slow, deliberate weight, and the glint of his flintlock pistol caught what little light remained from the storm-darkened sky. He stopped just short of the coffin, staring down at it like he was staring into the grave of an old friend. Or worse, a mistake he'd buried long ago. Without breaking his gaze, Blackbeard drew the pistol, cocking it with a sound that made every heart on deck stutter for a beat. His voice, low and rough like distant thunder, came next. "Open that cursed box, now!" No room for doubt, no room for hesitation. The order cut through the air like steel, and in that moment, as trembling hands moved toward the lid, as the sea fell silent, and even the Parrot grew quiet for the first time all day, every man aboard understood something none of them would ever forget. There are things on a pirate ship worse than death. And tonight, they were about to meet one. The first crack of wood echoed like a gunshot across the deck. Two sailors, their hands trembling, their faces pale as bone, lifted the coffin lid inch by inch. The hinges moaned, old and rusted, as if protesting against what was about to be revealed. The air shifted, cold, damp, heavier than before. Every man nearby leaned in without meaning to, pulled closer by the same kind of curiosity that drags sailors toward shipwrecks, knowing they shouldn't look, but unable to stop. And there he was, Captain Silas Drake, lying there, gasping for air like a drowning man dragged from the bottom of the sea. His skin, slick with sweat, glistened under the broken lantern light. His chest rose and fell, shallow, uneven, as if every breath was a battle, and he wasn't winning. The wound on his side, once thought fatal, oozed dark and slow. The bandages that had been wrapped days ago were soaked through, red and sticky, like the ship itself refused to let him die. His lips, cracked and trembling, parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak, to tell them what he'd seen, what he'd brought back. But no words came, just air, wet and thin, slipping from his throat, then breaking the stunned silence. The Parrot screamed again from its cage, louder this time, the sound cutting through bone and reason. "Still alive! Liars! Cursed liars!" The words clawed their way across the deck, crawling into the ears of every man, leaving behind a sickness no one could shake. Some stepped back, their boots slipping on the rain-slick boards, as if distance alone could protect them from what lay inside that box. Others just stood frozen, staring, like they were witnessing something they'd only heard about in drunken stories whispered late at night. Blackbeard stood motionless, his silhouette carved against the low mist, face unreadable. But inside, something burned. For a brief second, he closed his eyes, like a man forcing back a memory that should have stayed buried. When they opened again, they were darker, colder, as if every ounce of fury and betrayal he'd ever felt had returned at once, riding the back of this cursed moment. Without a word, he holstered his pistol, but his fingers lingered near the handle, ready, unwilling to trust even the air between him and the coffin. His voice, when it finally came, was quieter than before, but sharper, filled with something far worse than rage. "Get him below," he said, not out of mercy, not out of hope, but because some things, even Blackbeard knew, needed to be kept where light couldn't reach. And as Silas Drake's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, distant, like a man pulled halfway between worlds, the crew moved, slow, hesitant, knowing full well, whatever climbed out of that box tonight wasn't the same man they'd buried days ago. Below deck, the ship's surgeon fought to keep Captain Silas Drake breathing. The man worked by lantern light, his sleeves rolled, his hands slick with sweat and something darker. Every rag, every knife, every thread trembled between hope and futility. But above, on the rain-slick streets of Port Royal, Blackbeard had other battles to fight. With boots heavy and dripping, he burst through the warped back door of the tavern. The room stank of mold, stale rum, and betrayal. Wooden beams sagged overhead, bottles lay shattered on the floor, and in the far corner, hidden behind crates of spoiled grain, he found it. An old, half-rotten chest, barely held together by rusted nails and forgotten promises. Blackbeard crouched low, his fingers steady despite the storm still clinging to him, and forced the lid open with the butt of his pistol. Inside, maps cracked and brittle from years of salt air, some smeared with old rum stains, others with something far worse. Dark patches, dried, flaking, impossible to mistake for anything but blood. He pulled, one scroll free, unrolling it across the nearest table. Coordinates, ship names, supply routes, hidden anchorages used by Blackbeard's fleet for months. Places no man outside the Brotherhood should have known. But that wasn't the worst of it. Beneath the maps, wrapped in torn canvas and tied with string, lay a thinner roll, heavier than it looked. A list, written in rushed, uneven ink, like it had been scrawled in the dark by hands too nervous to stay steady. Names, men he knew, sailors who'd sworn loyalty over rum and salt, men who had fought beside him, laughed with him, buried others with him beneath Caribbean sands, and there, near the bottom, the ink faded, but clear enough to shatter whatever trust he still had left. Hawkins. The word hit Blackbeard's chest like a cannonball. The boatswain, the man who had stood beside him through storms, blockades, and bloodied decks. The same man who, just hours ago, stood trembling over Drake's coffin, pretending to fear the dead. So that's why the Parrot screamed betrayal. Why the air aboard felt rotten long before the rain started. This wasn't just fear, it was conspiracy. They hadn't just tried to bury Drake alive. They'd planned to sell every secret Blackbeard had, every ship, every hiding place, straight into the hands of the Royal Navy, with slow, deliberate breath. Blackbeard rolled the parchment back, tied it, and slid it inside his coat. His heart didn't race, not anymore. The fire inside him had shifted, turning cold, focused, like the eye of a storm. There would be no shouting, no questions, only action. He stood, straightened his shoulders, and walked back toward the ship. Every man still breathing aboard his vessel was about to find out. That betrayal, under Blackbeard's flag, had only one ending. The night pressed down like a curse. The rain, no longer soft or forgiving, fell in sharp sheets, cold as steel, slicing through clothes and skin alike. Lanterns flickered against the wind, their flames small, and trembling, just like the men gathered along the dock. Blackbeard stood at the center, his coat dripping, his face unreadable, more shadow than flesh beneath the storm. He hadn't called for a trial. There would be no debates, no speeches, no pleas for mercy. The entire crew, every soul that still drew breath under his flag, stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, waiting, hearts sinking like anchors in black water. From the far edge of the dock, two sailors dragged Hawkins forward. His boots scraped across the soaked planks, leaving muddy streaks like tracks from a hunted animal. His eyes darted, wide, frantic, searching for escape, for forgiveness, for something that wasn't coming. Blackbeard let him kneel, let him shake, let him taste the fear that had been brewing in the air all day. Then, slowly, with the kind of calm that only men like him possess, he raised the flintlock pistol, leveling it straight at Hawkins' chest. His voice, low, rough, like broken rope dragged over stone. "Tonight, there'll be no trial, only truth." The words rolled across the dock like thunder, reaching every ear, sinking into every spine. Before anyone could blink, Hawkins moved. A desperate lunge, one last wild attempt to run. His boots slipped, splashing water, but he pushed forward, stumbling, reaching for anything that might save him. The shot rang out, short, brutal, final. The ball tore into his leg, sending him crashing face first into the wooden boards with a howl that mixed pain with panic. He writhed, clutching at the wound, red mixing with rainwater, making it impossible to tell where the injury ended and the sea began. Blackbeard walked forward, slow, methodical, each step echoing louder than the last. When he reached Hawkins, he didn't kneel, didn't shout. He simply placed one heavy boot on the man's chest, pinning him to the dock like a broken mast left to rot. Leaning down, close enough that Hawkins could feel every word burning against his ear, Blackbeard spoke again. "If you meant to betray me," he hissed, "you should have killed me with your first shot." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick, heavy, suffocating, the kind of quiet that hangs in the air just before a storm tears a ship apart. And somewhere in the distance, from the ship still moored under the curtain of rain, the Parrot let out a single, sharp cry. Lies, soft this time, but enough to remind every man standing there that the night wasn't over. Not yet. The sea felt wrong, from the start. Days had passed since the dockside judgment, but the air aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge remained heavy, like it hadn't yet released the weight of what had been done, or what was coming next. Blackbeard stood at the helm, one hand gripping the wheel, the other resting near his pistol, always near. The scrolls recovered from the tavern lay sealed in oilskin beside him, their ink still stained with dried blood and old rum. The coordinates were clear enough: a forgotten island, north of Hispaniola, a place most sailors avoided, marked on some maps only by a single word, scrawled in faded ink: Wreckshore. Legend said it was where ships went to die, where reefs waited like jagged teeth, and where the sea dragged down anything foolish enough to drift too close. But Blackbeard didn't hesitate. Not now, not with betrayal still fresh on his tongue, and revenge burning colder with every mile. The crew worked in near silence. Every eye flicked toward the horizon, toward the shifting curtain of fog that grew thicker with each passing hour. And above them all, perched on the mainmast, wings damp, feathers ruffled from days of salt spray, sat the Parrot, no longer caged, no longer content to whisper its warnings in shadows. Now, free to scream for all to hear. Blood, blood, blood will flow. Again and again, its voice sharp, relentless, like a curse nailed to the ship's timbers. Men flinched at every cry. Some stuffed rags in their ears, others muttered prayers to Saints they barely believed in, but none dared silence the bird, not after Drake, not after Hawkins. The fog thickened as they neared the coordinates, curling over the deck like ghostly hands, swallowing the sun, turning daylight into something pale and cold. Blackbeard narrowed his eyes, scanning the shifting mist for signs of reefs, or worse, sails waiting just beyond sight. He knew they were close, not just to land, but to the men who thought they could sell out his fleet, bury Drake alive, and vanish into shadows with the Royal Navy's silver in their pockets. His voice cut through the cold like a blade. Ready the guns, load powder, eyes on the waterline. Around him, boots pounded against wet planks, cannons shifted into position, and hands tightened around cutlasses and pistols, not out of duty, but because every man aboard knew, whatever waited on that island, it wasn't going to surrender without spilling more blood. And above it all, from the crow's nest, the Parrot screamed, one final time, blood, blood, blood will flow. The words stretched across the fog, disappearing into the grey as the Queen Anne's Revenge slipped toward the unseen shore where betrayal waited, teeth bared, ready to finish what it started. The first shot came from the cliffs, a crack in the fog, a flash of powder, and a bullet buried itself in the sand just inches from Blackbeard's boots. Before the echo faded, the beach erupted. From behind jagged rocks and the twisted roots of dead trees, more than 40 men surged forward, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat, their hands gripping rusted cutlasses and loaded muskets, deserters, crown agents, spies who thought hiding among broken cliffs and black sand would keep them safe from the sea's most feared name. They were wrong. The crew of the Queen Anne's Revenge met them with steel and fury. Muskets roared, blades crashed, and the air filled with salt, smoke, and the bitter copper scent of spilled blood. The sand, pale at dawn, turned dark within minutes, soaking up the violence like thirsty earth, and in the middle of it all, fighting as if he had nothing left to lose, stood Silas Drake. His shirt, half torn and stained with both old wounds and new, clung to his chest. His bandages unraveled as he moved, but still, he pressed forward, swinging his blade with wild, desperate strength. A man who should have been dead, now fighting like he had dragged something back with him from the other side, something that refused to let him fall again. Blackbeard stayed close to the front, his sword carving a path through flesh and fear, his pistol already spent, but still gripped tight, ready to club down anyone who got too close. His face cold, focused, a man moving with one single purpose: end this. There was no time for orders, no time for plans, only instinct, and the years of violence that had shaped them all. The clash moved toward the rocks, bodies falling, blood pooling between the cracks of the stone. And then, from the edge of the chaos, came a sound unlike any other, a shriek, wild, furious, not from man or cannon, but from above. The Parrot, Drake's bird, wings stretched wide, eyes burning with something almost human, dove straight toward one of the traitors. A man who had once served on Blackbeard's ship now turned against him. Before the man could lift his musket, the Parrot struck, claws raking, beak stabbing, going for the eyes with relentless fury. The traitor screamed, dropping his weapon, hands clawing at his own face, blinded and panicked, stumbling backward until he slipped on the blood-slick stones. The crew pressed the advantage, charging with renewed rage, finishing what the bird had started. Blackbeard didn't pause, didn't flinch, just kept moving through the storm of steel and screams, cutting down anyone who stood between him and the heart of the conspiracy. By the time the sun broke through the fog, the beach was silent. Only the sound of waves dragging the bodies of The fallen back toward the sea remained, and above it all, perched on the ruined mast of a half-buried shipwreck nearby, the Parrot sat, watching, chest heaving, silent now, as if, for the first time, it was finally satisfied. The shoreline was quiet, but it wasn't peace. Bodies lay twisted across the wet sand, some still clutching their weapons, others staring at nothing, their faces frozen in the final moments of fear or regret. Smoke drifted low, mixing with the morning mist, while the sea crept in, tugging at boots, belts, and broken blades, as if eager to claim what remained. Blackbeard stood at the center of it all, breathing slow, steady, like a man used to the weight of aftermaths like this. His coat was torn at the shoulder, a shallow cut burned along his jaw, but his grip stayed firm, his focus sharp. Among the fallen, one figure still moved, a man, dressed not like a pirate, but in the stained remains of a Royal Navy coat, his insignia hidden beneath layers of dirt and blood, but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. A spy, a captain, sent to bleed Blackbeard's fleet from the inside, with no ceremony, no hesitation. Blackbeard dragged him by the collar across the sand, leaving a crooked line behind them as he pulled the man toward the water's edge, dropping him with a thud. Blackbeard knelt, planting a knee hard against the man's chest, pinning him to the beach with the same ruthless calm he'd shown with Hawkins. The traitor gasped, fighting for air, coughing against the weight. But Blackbeard didn't ease the pressure, his voice low, cold, full of the kind of fury that doesn't burn hot, but sinks deep like a ship taking on water. Tell me, who else? Who's behind this? For a moment, the only answer was the hiss of waves retreating from the shore, but then, with a cracked, broken whisper, the man spoke. 2 words, barely more than a breath. Port Royal. That was all. His head slumped sideways, breath fading, eyes dimming like lanterns left. Too long in the storm, Blackbeard stayed there, frozen in place, staring down at the man, not because he pitied him, but because something heavier settled over him now. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. If Port Royal was involved, if more hands were moving behind the scenes, if this conspiracy ran deeper than one crew and one beach, then what happened here, what spilled on these sands, was only the beginning of something far worse, standing slowly. Blackbeard wiped the blood from his blade, sliding it back into the worn leather at his side. He turned toward the Queen Anne's Revenge, her sails still low, her guns still loaded, waiting for their next command. Without a word, he walked back toward the ship, the air behind him thick with the smell of salt, iron, and something else, the scent of unfinished business. The air on deck felt heavier than before, as if the sea itself had been listening, holding its breath through every betrayal, every scream, every drop of blood. Spilled on the sand and wood, Blackbeard stood near the bow, his coat still wet from salt and rain, his gaze fixed far beyond the horizon, the island, the bodies, the confessions whispered through broken teeth. All of it stayed behind, buried beneath fog and regret, but the weight of what had happened that followed them. On his arm rested the Parrot, no longer caged, no longer screaming, just sitting there, its feathers ruffled, eyes dark and knowing, as if it had seen too much and understood even more. Silas Drake watched from the quarterdeck, still weak, still wrapped in stained bandages but breathing, his face pale, marked with the kind of exhaustion that stays in a man long after wounds close. Their eyes met for a brief second. No words passed between them, none were needed. Blackbeard's voice broke the silence, low, almost to himself, like a curse whispered to the waves. If I ever doubt a voice in the night again, May the sea take what's left of my soul." The words drifted into the wind, too soft for most of the crew to hear, but loud enough for those who understood the meaning behind them. And then, as if answering from some place deep inside, the parrot tilted its head, feathers shaking slightly, and in a voice far too close to a whisper, repeated, "Never again, never again." The sound settled over the ship like a closing chapter, but no one dared call it an ending. The sails rose, the anchor lifted, and the Queen Anne's Revenge moved forward, slicing through the grey water, leaving behind more than just an island, but a story no man aboard would ever forget. Yet even as they pulled away, every creak of the wood, every shift of the ropes, every shadow passing over the deck, carried a question none could answer. Who else waited in Port Royal? How deep did the betrayal go? And when the time came, would any of them survive what waited next? Some scars never fade, some debts the sea never forgives, and Blackbeard, standing tall at the helm, remained. Both hunter and hunted, forever pulled toward the horizon, chasing answers he might never find, dragging ghosts that would never let him rest. Did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been on that ship, what would you have done? What other sea stories deserve to be told here? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten.